The announcement echoed across the terminal, swallowed by the restless hum of bodies moving like waves. People rushed past, pulling luggage, clutching tickets, eyes fixed on destinations that had nothing to do with her. She sat perfectly still on the cold metal bench, a cracked leather suitcase at her side, its handle frayed, its lock refusing to close completely. Her fingers pressed against it anyway, as if holding it shut was the only thing keeping her from breaking open too. Her gaze drifted to the giant glass window. Outside, rain streaked down in trembling lines, blurring the city lights into a trembling watercolor. She could see her reflection faintly, the girl with tired eyes, lips pressed into silence, a red scarf wound tightly around her neck. The scarf wasn't new. Its edges were worn, threads threatening to unravel. She held onto it as if it held onto her. Someone laughed nearby, too loud, too careless. It reminded her of that night. The ballroom chandeliers, the clinking of wine glasses, the sharp sting of whispered words she was never meant to hear. She's lazy. Can't even keep up. Dead weight. They thought she wouldn't notice. They thought her silence meant weakness. Her nails dug into her palm now, grounding herself in the present. The airport's fluorescent light buzzed above, washing faces pale. Strangers passed without ever seeing her. Yet she saw everything. How their shoes scuffed the tiles, how their hands fumbled with passports, how their shoulders curled against invisible burdens. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. The scarf tightened as if it could shield her from memory, but memory was louder than trains, louder than storms. A little boy tugged at his mother's coat nearby, pointing at her suitcase. His eyes were curious, almost pitying. She forced herself to look away, but not before she noticed. His mother pulled him closer, like she was something fragile to be avoided. Fragile. That word had followed her like a shadow. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket. She didn't take it out. Not yet. Instead, she pressed her hand flat against the suitcase, feeling the uneven surface where the leather had cracked, as if the object itself carried scars. 1 year had passed. 12 months of silence, of carrying her own weight in secret. They hadn't seen her since. Not after that night. Not after the words that still clung to her like smoke. The boarding call sounded distant but sharp, like a bell at the end of something. She stood slowly, scarf trailing down her chest like a flag of quiet defiance. Her heart thudded once, twice. Lazy, she whispered under her breath, voice steady, almost dangerous. Then she lifted the suitcase, stepped toward the gate, and the rain outside fell harder, as if the sky itself held its breath. The suitcase grew heavier in her hand as she walked toward the gate, though she knew it wasn't the weight of clothes inside that pulled her down. It was history. Her steps slowed when she caught sight of a family embracing near the glass wall. A father bent low to lift his daughter, spinning her in the air, his laughter rising above the murmur of the terminal. The girl smiled, clutching his neck as if nothing else in the world mattered. She looked away quickly. Her throat tightened. Don't look too long. Don't want too much. The suitcase handle bit into her skin. It reminded her of another hand, rough but warm, her father's, guiding hers as a child when she carried the same battered bag for the first time. Back then it wasn't cracked. Back then it smelled faintly of leather and new beginnings. He used to say, "A bag doesn't carry just things. It carries how far you're willing to go." She could almost hear his voice now, low and steady, laced with the smell of engine oil from his late-night shifts. But that was years ago. Before debts. Before the silence at home stretched into a wall. Before she had to learn to hide her hunger in coffee cups at work, so no one noticed how thin she'd become. The scarf brushed against her lips as she inhaled. A thread caught between her teeth. She tugged it free, tasting salt. Around her, passengers laughed, greeted, hurried with certainty. She stood still. Alone. Invisible and unmoored except for one thing. Someone was watching her. At first she thought it was accident. Just another stranger pausing in the flow of bodies. But when she shifted her suitcase, his eyes followed. He didn't look away, didn't glance around as if embarrassed to be caught. His silence felt chosen, like he'd been standing in it long before she noticed. He leaned lightly against a column, hands in pockets, gaze steady but unreadable. Not hostile. Not kind. Just there. Her chest tightened again, though not from fear. From something harder to name. The boarding call repeated, more urgent now. The line had begun to move. People shuffled forward, passports flashing in the fluorescent glow. She adjusted the scarf, fingers trembling against the knot. She should move. She should go. But her feet didn't obey. They lingered, as though hesitation itself had weight. She looked back once at the family still laughing, at the stranger still watching, at the rain outside carving streaks against glass. The suitcase handle slipped in her sweaty palm. She caught it just in time, breath sharp in her throat. For a moment she almost smiled. Not joy. Not relief. Something stranger. Like confusion wrapped in defiance. Then she turned her face toward the gate again, but her body didn't move. The line thinned as passengers disappeared into the jet bridge. The boarding door loomed ahead, glowing with a sterile light that promised escape but also demanded surrender. She stood inches away from moving forward, yet her body stayed rooted, her fingers tangled tighter around the scarf. The rain outside had shifted. No longer soft streaks, but heavy drops colliding with glass like fists. Each strike rattled something inside her chest. Her eyes flicked sideways. The stranger was still there. Not moving. Not pretending. His coat was damp at the shoulders, darkened by rain. His shoes, black but scuffed to gray at the tips, told a story of distance walked without pause. She noticed the edge of a wallet peeking from his pocket, its leather thinned and folded from years of use. When he adjusted his stance, something slipped out, a photograph half hidden. A woman's face, blurred from water damage, smiled faintly from the corner before he tucked it back with quick, almost tender care. Something about the small detail jolted her. The cracks in his life reflected her own. For a moment it was as if the suitcase and his worn shoes belonged to the same language, spoken by those who had carried too much for too long. Why is he watching me? Her pulse pressed in her throat. Was it curiosity or recognition? Was she imagining the mirror he seemed to hold up to her without words? Thunder rolled low above the airport, its growl slipping through the ceiling panels. The family who had been laughing earlier now hurried toward the gate. Umbrellas dripping, their voices softer now. Their closeness left an ache in her that no scarf could warm. The announcer repeated the final call. She shifted forward. One step. The suitcase wheels scraped the tile. But then her foot stalled. The stranger tilted his head, the smallest movement, but it caught her, like an invisible tether between them. His eyes were not sharp, not cold. They carried weight. Familiar weight. Her thoughts tangled. She had promised herself. Leave, begin again, prove them all wrong. But why did her chest twist now? As if the rain outside had soaked through her ribs and turned resolve into mud. She glanced once more at him, searching for cruelty, for trickery. Instead she only saw exhaustion. A face weathered not by years, but by choices that had carved silence into him. The scarf fluttered as the wind from the jet bridge hissed open. Her hand tightened on the suitcase, tendons sharp against skin. She should walk through. She should. But instead she stopped. The stranger's gaze didn't shift. Neither did hers. And in that suspended moment, between storm and departure, between defiance and surrender, nothing resolved. Only silence deepened. The line at the gate had vanished. Only stragglers hurried past, their footsteps echoing against the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of wet coats and recycled coffee. Her heart pounded against her ribs as the attendant lifted the microphone one last time. Voice flat but firm. Final boarding call. Her throat burned. She took a step forward, the suitcase wheels dragging, then another. The scarf brushed against her cheek, damp from her own breath. The door was so close now. One swipe of her ticket and she would vanish into the hollow belly of the plane, away from everything. But she stopped. Just once more she looked back. The stranger had moved. Not far, only a few feet closer. His gaze still locked on hers, but now his hand held something. Her suitcase's lock had slipped open in her nervous grip, and from it, the scarf's loose thread had fallen. No, she realized with a sharp intake of air. It wasn't the scarf. It was the small notebook she kept hidden in the side pocket. Its edges soft, corners bent from years of scribbling when no one was watching. Now it was in his hand. He didn't speak, didn't rush. He only raised it slightly like an offering, like a secret uncovered. For a moment it seemed the entire terminal held its breath with her. Her chest tightened. That notebook carried scraps of her, the words she never dared say aloud, the fragments of nights when she wanted to give up, the fire that kept her alive when they called her lazy. And now he held it with the gentleness of someone who knew what it meant to carry silence. Her lips parted. No words came out. Behind her, a man muttered impatiently, tugging his coat tighter. A woman whispered, not even bothering to lower her voice. "She's holding up the line." The judgment pressed against her like invisible hands, pushing her forward, toward the gate, toward the life she thought she wanted. But her eyes stayed on him. He tilted his head, and in that stillness came a voice, not loud, not even certain, but low enough that she heard it as though it were inside her own chest. "Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence." Her grip on the suitcase trembled. The scarf slid from her shoulder, slipping like a red flame onto the floor. The attendant cleared her throat sharply. "Miss, are you boarding?" Her pulse raced. The notebook, his eyes, the scarf pooling at her feet, the mutters around her. Everything blurred into a storm she couldn't step out of. And yet she didn't move. The question hung in the air, unanswered. So did she. The scarf still lay on the floor like a wound she couldn't bend down to pick up. Her hand hovered midair, torn between reaching for it and moving toward the boarding gate. The notebook was still in his hand. The stranger hadn't spoken again, but his silence had deepened, thick enough to pull her into it. Then as he stepped forward, the notebook shifted, its worn cover pressing against a small silver pin clipped to his jacket. She hadn't noticed it before. The company crest. The same sharp emblem engraved on the invitation from last year's gala. Her stomach dropped. She blinked, unsure if her eyes were lying. But there it was, unmistakable. The same company where they had called her lazy. The same empire she had clawed against in silence. And he, this stranger, wasn't just passing through. He was part of it. The suitcase's handle slipped from her grip and hit the floor with a hollow sound. A nearby couple glanced at her, frowning, then whispering something she couldn't hear but felt. Judgment again, always judgment. Her chest tightened as memory flooded back. The laughter, the whispers, the sting of humiliation as chandeliers sparkled overhead. Dead weight. She had carried those words, just as she carried the suitcase. But now, standing in front of him, she wasn't sure if she was the one carrying, or being carried into something she couldn't escape. The scarf's red fabric caught the air-conditioning draft and fluttered faintly. He bent, not rushed but careful, and picked it up. For a second, his fingers lingered on it with an intimacy that made her heart stumble. Then she saw his hand pause. His eyes lowered, unreadable, before he finally lifted them back to hers. "This." His voice was quiet, frayed around the edges. "My daughter wore one like this." She froze. The rain outside cracked louder against the glass, thunder growling deep. A thread of lightning lit the window, revealing both their faces in reflection. Hers pale with shock, his shadowed with grief. The suitcase. The scarf. The silence. Not random. Not coincidence. Her father's words echoed unbidden. "A bag doesn't carry just things. It carries how far you're willing to go." But whose journey was this now, hers or his? Her pulse thundered. She realized there was no way back. Even if she boarded, even if she ran, she had crossed into something larger than escape. The attendant called again, sharper this time. "Miss, decision, please." But she wasn't looking at the gate anymore. He opened his palm slowly, offering both the notebook and the scarf together. She stepped forward, past the gate, past the whispers, past the line that no longer mattered, into a space where silence demanded an answer. And the door behind them closed. The rain had stopped by the time she followed him down the dim corridor. The noise of the terminal faded behind, replaced by the soft hum of hidden offices tucked away from the crowd. The suitcase rolled beside her like a stubborn shadow, its wheels clicking faintly against the tiles. They entered a small conference room. No chandeliers here, no polished smiles. Just gray walls, a long table, and windows still streaked with the storm's memory. He placed the scarf and notebook carefully on the table, as though setting down something sacred. She didn't sit. Her chest heaved with a mixture of fear and defiance. Why? The word cracked out of her before she could stop it. He looked at her, the weight of years in his eyes. Because you remind me, he said slowly, of someone I failed. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. She glanced at the scarf, the notebook, then back at him. The company emblem on his jacket seemed to burn brighter in her vision, tying him to everything she thought she hated. You were there that night. Her voice was barely a whisper. At the gala. He nodded once.
No denial. No excuses.
Her pulse stung against her skin. She wanted to run, to leave the objects where they lay and never see him again. But instead, she found herself whispering the words her father once said. A bag doesn't carry just things. It carries how far you're willing to go. His eyes closed briefly, as though the line cut deeper than she intended. When he opened them again, his voice was softer, almost hollow. I lost my daughter because I didn't see how far she was going. Too late, I called her weak, lazy, and she left. She never came back. Her breath hitched. The word lazy, that had once broken her, was now a ghost that haunted him. He slid the scarf toward her. Take it. Carry it further than she could. The object, once hers, now became something else. Part memory, part inheritance, part weight she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away. You're not choosing me, she said, the realization sharp in her mouth. You're choosing a shadow. He didn't deny it. Maybe. But shadows remind us of the light we lost. For a long moment neither spoke. The rain outside had slowed to a drip, each drop echoing like a clock tick. She lifted the scarf. For the first time, instead of wrapping it tight around her throat like armor, she folded it gently and placed it inside the cracked suitcase. The object that once carried her wounds now carried something larger than her. She pushed the suitcase toward him. A sacrifice. A release. This isn't mine alone anymore. Their eyes met, hers steady, his haunted. She turned, walking out of the room without the suitcase, without the scarf, but with something else burning quietly inside. The sense that survival wasn't about carrying weight forever, but about knowing when to let it down. At the doorway she paused, breath trembling. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay. But some leave you changed forever. The night air smelled different when she stepped outside the terminal, lighter, rinsed clean by the storm. The pavement still gleamed with rain, reflecting fragments of neon signs and blurred headlights. She walked without the suitcase for the first time in years. Her hands felt bare but not empty. Each step sounded sharper, steadier, as if the echo itself was proof she still remained. Strangers brushed past, clutching their bags and umbrellas, but she carried nothing. The scarf, the notebook, the weight of all those words, gone from her shoulders. She paused near a glass door where her reflection met her. This time she didn't flinch. She looked herself in the eye and breathed, not shallow and hurried, but slow and deliberate, as though her lungs had finally remembered how to hold air without fear. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. The line drifted through her like a voice carried by the wind. Her father's, maybe. Or perhaps his. Or maybe her own. It no longer mattered where it came from. What mattered was how it stayed. In a small apartment later, she placed the suitcase beneath her bed. Not discarded, not forgotten, but resting. She let her hand linger on its cracked surface one last time, then slid it into the shadows. A drawer on the nightstand stood open, and inside she tucked the scarf, folded neatly under the light. It glowed faintly, red against the wood, like a reminder that silence could be carried, but also shared. The window stood open, and the air was cool on her skin. She leaned against the frame, watching the city move. Cars like veins of light, voices floating from unseen corners. Life went on with or without her, but now she no longer felt outside of it. She remembered the boy at the airport pointing at her suitcase, his innocent eyes seeing fragility. Maybe one day she'd tell her story differently, not of fragility, but of strength that chose to bend without breaking. Her phone buzzed once on the table. She didn't rush to answer. Not every call was meant to be answered right away. Some things could wait. She closed her eyes, exhaling as the night pressed softly against her. The silence was no longer heavy. It was spacious. She whispered into it to no one in particular. Some journeys aren't about arriving anywhere. They're about learning how to leave. And for a moment the city seemed to listen.